welcome to another episode of the Duke It Out Wrestling Podcast, where I, Duke, talk about events from the past, present, or future in the world of professional wrestling. Now, I've taken a bit of a break from this channel, especially because it has been a very chaotic January. As soon as the year began, either I was moving out and moving into new places, or I was helping other people move out and move into new places. And by the time I was really able to catch a break, it was when I was able to fly to Miami and go on the Chris Jericho Rock and Wrestling Rager, the fifth annual cruise that Chris Jericho has hosted. This one titled The Five Alive, and I had a fucking blast on this cruise. I had heard plenty of things from people who had been on the cruise before and how fun it was, and everything that they had told me exceeded those expectations. I had a blast the whole way through, watching some great wrestling, listening to some fun music, playing games, or watching some great comedy. It was a blast all around, and I wanted to make this podcast to kind of just explain my experience through everything, what I thought with many events that happened on the cruise, because there was so many that you could choose from. Because we boarded on Friday, and that's when we took off, and then we came back to Miami on Tuesday morning, and so it was around a 4-day cruise. And yeah, there was almost something happening at least almost every single hour for this cruise. Either there was music, and the wrestling would always be usually a little later in the day. There was the earliest wrestling that happened was like at 4:15 p.m. and there was a stop in Cozumel, Mexico. I didn't get off the ship too much, and I know there was plenty of other people who didn't as well. But regardless, it was an amazing time, and whether it was a great time staying on the ship and not really being off for that much longer, and because that there was so much alone that you could just be entertained with on that ship. Um, from I think 13 to 14 floors, and arcades in some rooms, theater in another, and of course, almost a bar in almost every single floor. And of course, there were great themed drinks, all in the theme of Chris Jericho. There's the one I had the most was the Jericho Appreciation Society, which of the chasers in it was, I think, Coca-Cola, um, ginger, lemon, I think it was as well, and there was also Captain Morgan and another type of rum in there that I couldn't remember. But that was one I had the most, and there were other ones called like Painmaker Punch, and they had some really fun puns and a bunch of them. And you can get a drink package. I didn't for this one just because I'm not a huge drinker. I do drink, but especially on vacations when I drink a little more. But the amount that I spent on alcohol wasn't even as much as the drink package was. So I am really glad I didn't end up doing that. And plus, because there's so many other things that I had bought throughout the cruise that it probably would have put me in fucking bankruptcy. But um the first thing I want to get into, because the first thing that happens when we're really leaving the ship is the performance from Fozzy, Chris Jericho's band, if you didn't know. And there was all the Fozzy performances were great. There were 3 performances from Fozzy on this cruise as soon as we leave, and then the next day they did a covers night, and then the final day of the cruise they had one last show. And all of them were a ton of fucking fun. The first one was probably the most entertaining just because it was the first, and I've never seen Jericho's band live before, so that was a ton of fun, and they were all very interactive with the crowd. And before Fozzy came out, Jericho, along with the main wrestling themed hosts on the cruise, or co-hosts, like Paul White went up there, CJ Perry, Santino Marella. And funny thing with Santino Marella, he made this joke for the cruise that whenever he gets drunk or starts drinking, he becomes Fun Time Tony. So Fun Time Tony became super fucking over on the cruise, which many random things got over on the cruise, which I'll get into a little bit later. But that was a ton of fucking fun. Fozzy did a great job, and other musicians that were there. There were a good number of cover bands. There was a Foo Fighters cover band and a Van Halen cover band, and the Van Halen cover band was all female, so they were called Femme Halen. There was so much great music, and James Durbin, if you watched American Idol from 10 to 15 years ago now, I remembered him from that season. I was like, oh fuck yeah, he's performing here, let's go. And I watched his show as well. And and then when it came to any other type of shows, the comedy killed it. And I'll more so go through that in through order of what I'd really went to for the cruise. And anything show wise, anything wrestling, I was going to be there immediately. The only wrestling that I did miss out on, and I'm really bummed out about this. Oh, almost hit the microphone cord there. But one match that I did miss out on was Matt Cardona defending his Jericho's Oceanic Championship against Michael Oku. That was the only match that I missed out on. I was really bummed I did, and I kind of had a feeling that I was because there you had some certain meet and greets that you could do either one day or another. They would offer the same people, and my meet and greet with the Dudley Boys was at the same time that that match was going on. So that was the only wrestling that I had to unfortunately miss. But when it comes to wrestling, one of the first matches that did happen, I want to get into immediately because he was by far the most over heel on this cruise, and that was Johnny TV / John Morrison, or what we've been calling him on the cruise was either Johnny Cruz or Johnny Valkyrie, and both of those chants got super over. And yeah, we also chanted Johnny Basic at him. He got so many different chants, and it was hilarious. And he was one of the wrestlers that performed, I think, almost every single night. The wrestlers that were the most consistent in having like a different match each night, from what I can think of off the top of my head, Johnny TV, Vikingo, Nick Wayne, Penta was in quite a few. There was, and yeah, Trent Beretta as well. Like they were probably the most consistent performers, along with Michael Oku as well, who is the new Oceanic champion, which I'll just more so bring that up many different occasions because I'm so bummed that I fucking missed it. But and all the wrestling matches were really, really fun. Either if they weren't anything like amazing in ring quality, it made up for being such fun comedy matches. Like Colt Cabana and Nick Wayne had a hilarious match on one of the nights. And Colt Cabana just acted super over the top and was just interacting with the crowd as much as he possibly could. And that was a ton of fun. But I would say the first night of wrestling was a ton of fun, but I think the second night had the best night of wrestling, which I'll get into in a second. But then after the first night, there was stand-up comedy for each night, and the only comedy nights I did see were the second night and the final night. I am low-key bummed that I didn't go to every single comedy showcase night, because after the wrestling shows, I would either be chilling back in the hotel room or just watching some of the music and going to the bar or arcade. And there was a casino, but I don't know jack shit about anything with casinos, so I figured, yeah, don't spend any money here. But yeah, the first night was just very fun. It was good to settle in, but I would say the second day, or the entire Saturday, was probably my favorite part of the cruise itself, because with my ticket, I had the AEW star meet and greets or photo sessions for Saturday, and the photo shoots that I got were with Swerve and Prince Nana. I thought that was probably my favorite photo, just because I was just doing this along with Nana, which was a really, really funny visual. And then I got to meet Penta, which was insanely awesome. And I made sure that the main thing I would say to him when I walked up to him was to thank him for that tag team match against the Young Bucks at All Out 2021. That steel cage match is the best tag team match I'd seen live, bar none. So I immediately had to thank him for that match. And he immediately mentioned that he still felt the shoe from Matt Jackson, that I think it was the Travis Scott Nike that was covered in a bunch of spikes. So I thought that was really funny. And I was debating on doing the photo session with Vikingo, and I ended up not doing it. But then, luckily, you get to interact with the wrestlers plenty of times throughout the cruise. More than likely, you're gonna be in an elevator with one of them. You're gonna walk past them every now and then, and most of the time, they're just gonna be friendly as long as you're not like bombarding them or in their face. And while I was at the bar later that night, I saw Vikingo and then was able to get a selfie with him. So that was fucking incredible. And then when it came to the wrestling on Saturday night, it definitely brought out the best match of the cruise for me. And some people were telling me that Michael Oku and Matt Cardona may have been better than this one, but I can't judge. And if you were on the Jericho cruise and you saw both matches, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But Michael Oku's match to get the Oceanic Championship match against Speedball Mike Bailey was a phenomenal fucking match. And wasn't too familiar with Michael Oku. I know he'd done some stuff in Rev Pro, but I don't watch a ton of Rev Pro. But I was mainly introduced to Speedball Mike Bailey when I went to the GCW show at the Harpo Center before SummerSlam last year. And he gave a phenomenal performance. And then months after, had that highlighted Impact match or slash TNA match against Will Ospreay. So I was ready for some awesome in-ring action, and they brought more than they could deliver. And there were some great spots back and forth where and they also had a stop at one point where Speedball hit Michael Oku in the back of the neck, and we kind of chanted "You fucked up" at him. So, so Michael Oku had to give him a little bit of a receipt back, and that was just a ton of fun. And since they both were named Mike, we were doing a whole both these mics or let's go Mike, and that was a ton of fun. The crowd overall was super fucking fun, and I've been told about these about a couple dudes who were apparently also on the cruise last year, but they were dressed up as bananas, and they kept building um out of a bunch of empty cans. It turned into a chair, then at one point it became a ladder at one point, and then at the final night it was a table. Super fucking random, but when you're on the ship, it's a lot more fucking fun. And it definitely helps that everyone is pretty tipsy. So that's also a good advantage. But anyway, back to the match. Michael Oku and Speedball Mike Bailey was so damn good. Near the third half, they definitely had some near falls in there where they genuinely got me, and I thought it was over. And I wasn't really expecting to get those kind of matches on the Jericho cruise. I was expecting to get purely entertainment, but this was definitely just one of the best professional wrestling matches that I've been able to witness live and in the flesh. And Michael Oku got an awesome upset win, especially because Speedball was definitely the bigger star with those two. And we had already known that he was going to be teaming with Jeri-show later on in the cruise. So I had a feeling it was going to be him. But with Michael Oku winning, it even brought more unpredictability to the Oceanic match against Cardona, which was really, really cool. But yeah, by far the best match on the cruise. And then when it comes to comedy, this was the first thing comedy related that I saw, and I'm so glad that I went to this show because around this time, since it was on Saturday, it was the same night that the Royal Rumble was happening. So this was the first time in more than a decade that I hadn't watched the Royal Rumble pay-per-view live, or not live in the arena, but actually just watched it at home. It was the first time since probably 2011 that I hadn't watched the Royal Rumble pay-per-view like that night. But it was entirely worth it because the first comedy night, it was RJ City hosting this ad-lib improv show with a few of the other wrestlers from AEW. The people that joined him there was Santino Marella, Johnny TV, Johnny Cruz, Johnny Valkyrie, whatever you want to call him, Taya Valkyrie, Harley Cameron, Colt Cabana, and Prince Nana. And all of it was so fucking funny. I could mention random little bits that they did, but it just get way too cluttered. But they were all super funny. The crowd was super interactive, and especially for wrestling fans, there were some hilarious references either from WWE or AEW or any other wrestling promotion. It was just a ton of fucking fun. And Johnny Cruz ended up winning the whole thing, which was hilarious, especially with the fact that he lost every wrestling match that he had on the cruise. So it's like, good for you, Johnny. At least you get one dub here, which was pretty fun. And and then for Sunday, it was the day we got to Cozumel, so that was the day where most people got to relax, or in my case, I got extremely fucking sunburnt that day, but it was totally worth it. And also, oh yeah, and on Saturday night, Fozzy did their covers night, which was a very fun show, especially with the fact that Jericho dressed up like David Bowie, which was insanely entertaining, and did so many different songs, going from either The Weeknd's Blinding Lights and to Tainted Love. It was a great set, super entertaining, and once the ship started moving again, it was soon back to wrestling pretty quickly after that. And that's when Orange Cassidy and Daniel Garcia arrived on the cruise, because since they had the Collision taping, they weren't able to be on the cruise for the entire time. So we got the appearances from Daniel Garcia and Orange Cassidy, so that was insanely fun. And these were both from from their second nights performing, but I just had to bring it up just because both these moments were so much fun. Johnny Cruz kept getting himself more further over by kicking the drinks of anyone that put his drink out in front of him in the front row during his entrance. And I definitely got soaked in a drink that Johnny kicked at least 2 or 3 times. But it was super fucking funny. Then when Daniel Garcia went out to face him, he was holding a drink in his hand. Johnny was prepared to kick it. Then Daniel Garcia splashed the drink in his face. Simple, but really effective and really funny. And then with Orange Cassidy, when he teamed up with Trent Beretta and Rocky Romero, they did act a bit heelish against the Guns, which I thought was pretty funny. And they both did a comedy reenactment where they all did the best friend hug, and then they all did the scissoring as well, since Bang Bang Scissor Gang is starting to get extremely over. And if the Acclaimed was also on that cruise, it would have been twice as more over. But one funny thing I wanted to mention with Orange Cassidy is that he did get a bit heelish there, and there was even one point where he went full John Cena and did his entire 5 moves of doom comeback moveset. I thought that was fucking hilarious and one of my favorite moments of the cruise. And then the night closed off with, well, not Sunday night. I'll save that for a bit later. But then on Monday night, I was able to do a Legends photo session, which was also great. And the legends I chose for that photo session, the first one was Santino Marella / Funtime Tony, and he was super entertaining throughout the entire cruise. That was the picture I got with him, but he was one of the most interactive people without that cruise that I'd talked to him, or at least like fist bumped him while walking past, like at least 2 or 3 other times throughout the cruise before that. So he was super nice throughout. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I missed Michael Oku becoming the Oceanic champion because I was doing the meet and greet with the Dudley Boys. And Bubba Ray was clearly fucking hungover, and it made a lot of sense because I had seen Bubba Ray so many other times around the cruise, passing shots to people, being super fun and drunk as fuck. So it made a ton of sense. And I hadn't seen Devon Dudley around any other part of the cruise until this photo session. So at least, so since he wasn't as interactive, he definitely let it show in the meet and greet, and he was super fucking nice. And then once that was over, I immediately went down back to my area on the ramp to try and get as close to that area as I possibly could for the rest of the show. And it had a ton of great matches. And then and it capped off with the main event of Jeri-show reuniting, and they even played the Jeri-show theme song from back in the day, and that was awesome. And their gear was tributing what they wore in the Jeri-show era as well. And it was Jeri-show and Speedball Mike Bailey against the Guns and, no, not the Guns. What am I fucking saying? I'm already not forgetting the heels. Right, the Don Callis family. What the fuck am I thinking? But then Don Callis was running around the ramp and being an awesome heel, and he had got some fun heelish moments throughout the weekend as well. There was a Busted Open podcast with Dave and Bully Ray, and they had Don Callis come out to accept his Manager of the Year award from last year. And so there was great heel heat for Callis. And then Speedball Mike Bailey got the pin for the babyface team, which was a ton of fun. And then the Guns came out afterward to start beating up Chris Jericho and Paul White and everyone else, which then led to Santino coming out and Ultimo Dragon coming out and the Dudleys coming out to do a 3D through the table. That was a ton of fucking fun. And Jericho mentioned that it is a tradition on the cruise for a bunch of the legends to come out and just have a really fun, random, entertaining wrestling moment. And that was an amazing ending to the cruise, along with every other amazing event that had happened throughout it. And one thing I did forget to mention that I really just wanted to shout out, because I had so much fun watching this on the cruise. Johnny TV and Taya Valkyrie had directed a short film that they released, that it's, for at least according to IMDb, they released it to festivals in 2022, and it was called The Iron Sheik Massacre, and it was a puppeteer VFX horror comedy that I don't really want to get into. If you're a wrestling fan, whenever it comes out, just watch it for yourself, because I had such a great fucking time watching this short. And Johnny was super kind to everybody, and so was Taya, explaining a lot of stuff of how they made the movie and how long some certain things took to get fully developed. And that was an entertaining experience, especially because since I'm a big movie fan and I always love to support independent filmmaking, it was great to see that side of him, and it was a great short film overall. But yeah, this cruise, I could not have asked for a better experience. Had some had like I mentioned, great wrestling, great music, great comedy, and Brad Williams also had some stand up sets as well. I did get to see his set along with a few other stand up comedians, including Hacksaw Jim Duggan to close off the comedy showcase on the last night. But Brad Williams fucking made me laugh my ass off, as of course I expected, and he did just as much in the podcast interview that he did in the cruise with and the Talk is Jericho podcast that was with Brad Williams, Jericho, and Paul White. And then Jericho also did a fun podcast. I think it was on Friday or Saturday with ECW legends, and that was a ton of fun as well. And of course, I'm glad I forgot to bring this up because I do want to save this for last because this was one of my personal favorite moments on the cruise. You did get the chance to take a photo in the ring, and the ring that was inside the Stardust Theater where Jericho did his podcast in. And you were able to take a photo in there. And what was extra cool about it was that Dan Lambert was there. And he apparently did this for last year's cruise too, where he brought his belt collection. And he has so many belts from the business that go from 1950s NWA or Jerry Lawler's Memphis promotion, the 60s and 70s, to the most current belt that he had in that collection was one of the actual AEW TNT championships. And me and my dad got to take a photo in the ring when we each got to choose a belt. I chose the World Heavyweight Championship that apparently Chris Benoit had won off of Triple H at WrestleMania 20, and it still had the Triple H engraving on it, which was insane. And my dad chose the NWA tag title from the 50s since he was born in the 1950s, which I thought was really, really fucking awesome. And that was definitely a highlighted moment of the cruise for me. And it was very cool to see just how much of a genuinely nice human being that Dan Lambert is, since he's one of the best heel managers in the game, probably of all time. It was really cool just to see him outside of his character and just how nice he was to let a bunch of wrestling fans just hold these belts of fucking history, also including Stone Cold Steve Austin's Flaming Skull title, and hold it in a ring. Like, that's fucking amazing. And that's a moment with my dad I'll never forget. And I'm really glad I did bring my dad because he's not a big wrestling fan, but it was really cool to let him just see that side of me. And he's also a big fan of rock and roll music, so he got to see the great music, and he loves stand-up comedy, and he loves drinking on cruise ships. So, like, what more could you go wrong? And I also got to meet some amazing people on this cruise. I'm not going to mention them by name, but if you're watching this podcast, you know who you are. Thank you so much for making the cruise even better of an experience than it already was. And it's a very cluttered experience overall because you're just having such a blast the whole way through and just trying to follow everything by the schedule, not really wanting it to end, and then just hoping that you're able to go to next year. And I'm definitely going to be trying to make sure that I'll be on the Jericho cruise for next year, which is titled Six on the Beach, which, if it's just as fun as it was this last week, then I am all for it. This was a ton of fucking fun, especially if you're a wrestling fan that doesn't really get to let out your wrestling fan self as often. It was a much needed experience for me. But that was my podcast explaining the Jericho 5 Alive, and I once again had a fucking blast. And if you have not been on the Jericho cruise as well, you're a fan of wrestling or AEW or rock and roll music, whatever, I highly recommend it if you're able to go on the cruise for next year because it was an absolute blast. But thank you so much for listening, and please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, and duke out your opinions below in the comments.